Hi, and welcome to SP and today's discussion on big oil, you, diversity and inclusion. Why is diversity and inclusion important today? What are the challenges and opportunities to improve diversity and inclusion in oil and gas? My name is Nils Kaageson-Loe. It's my great pleasure to be your host today. If you're new to SPE Live, check us out on social media, hashtag SPE Live, or find us on www.spe.org. We have many exciting SP Lives coming to you in the coming weeks, so keep connected to us on social media and you should catch us there. All content is free on demand and also live. SPE Live is in part made possible by sponsorship from the SPE Foundation. Now, do you want your name, face and brand associated with the mission of SPE and the SPE Foundation? If so, we have tens of thousands of followers and we are looking for additional sponsors for the program. So please contact us on spelive@spe.org. We'll be waiting to hear from you. So thank you. And now, today on SPE Live, we're turning our attention to the subject of diversity and inclusion. Today's live stream is part of a 3-program series looking at this topic, and we'll bring it to you today and later in January and February. So why diversity and inclusion? What do we have to say as an organization, as an industry that is different? Many argue oil and gas is a male-dominated business, a bit of a dinosaur. Others argue oil and gas companies have made great strides in incorporating diversity and inclusion policy into their work cultures and management practices. The oil price has crashed during 2019, resulting in tens of thousands of layoffs in the industry. COVID-19 has impacted not only oil and gas, but everybody. And, so in particular, it's impacted women in the workplace. So is this all opportunity or a dilemma for diversity and inclusion in oil and gas? These are some of the questions that we want to address today and in the coming programs in January and February. Now we have a very diverse and very experienced panel joining us today to help answer some of those questions and also your questions as an audience. Challenge us, ask us questions. For the panel today, joining us, we have an excellent panel today. We have Evelyn McLean-Quick, Vice President, Energy Workforce Transformation at Hess Corporation. We have Shauna Noonan, 2020 SP President and Director of Artificial Lift Engineering at Oxy. Nihal Mounir Darraj, Advantek Waste Management Services and Tech Woman Fellow. Yogashri Pradhan, Endeavour Energy Resources and Chair for SPE's Women in Energy Committee, now renamed to Diversity and Inclusion Committee. And finally, joining the panel is David Reid, Chief Marketing Officer and Chief Technology Officer at NOV and founder of Red M. Evelyn, Shauna, Nihal, Yoshi, David, a big panel. So very welcome to all of you to SP Live. Hopefully we're going to have a really good conversation. I know all of you are very engaged in this particular topic of diversity and inclusion. Audience members, please, fingers on buzzers and keyboards, please share your comments and questions with us. This is a big topic. It's a thorny topic, so we want to include you in this discussion. It's a very important discussion that we're going to have today following SP Lives. So let's kick us off. Evelyn, I'm going to turn the first question over to you. Why diversity inclusion now? Why is it so important?
Thanks, Nils, and it's a privilege to be here with everyone today. So as I think about that question, what comes to mind for me is it's the right thing to do. It's simply good business to have a diverse, inclusive and equitable workforce. As we've all witnessed, society's expectations are shifting. The industry's challenges, they're becoming more complex. As Nils just reminded us, it has not been a good year for the industry. The COVID-19 pandemic has seen volumes and volumes of value and, of course, lots of people erosion. And so we need to mobilize more diverse perspectives to meet the challenges of today and of tomorrow. And I just come back to what I said there at the beginning. Why? Because it's good business. It's the right thing to do. I'll give it back to you there, Nils.
Thank you. Thank you, Evelyn. So, Nihal, let's just move across to you. Why diversity inclusion now? What's so important? What's the challenge, opportunity?
So I kind of agree with Evelyn on this. It's because you want to attract talents. You want to have an environment that fosters everyone and everyone feels that they are included. And this would give a great confidence to the company and to your brand, is just having this environment where everyone is invited and everyone can create, and you can eventually and you will eventually stand out by having a diverse and inclusive environment. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Nihal. Yoshi, you're chairing the Diversity Inclusion Committee in SPE. So, what are your thoughts? Why now? Why important? I have a slight lag from Yoshi there. Okay, whilst we've fixed that problem, David, I'm going to hand it over to you here. If you can just kick us off there, please.
The why now, I think, is pretty easy because we're kind of an industry of waves. You know, we go through these cycles, and every time we go through a down cycle is a great opportunity. And the development of our people and the building of better companies, I think for me, it's always in the performance side of individuals to understand diversity and inclusion. It's a great way to create better leaders, to engage people better, to perform better. I think that softer skill of everybody in the industry of understanding others and being able to make more people be a part always makes for better business, better performance, and just enjoyment of everybody. The development of human beings in general is always a good idea. An improvement of communication and connection is just such a strong benefit to everybody. So I think it's very much a now opportunity.
Thanks, David. Shauna, do you want to sort of lead in with your opening comments here around this? Why now?
Well, we've been tackling or addressing the D part, the diversity, for many years. But the thing is we need to be spending more time on the inclusion piece. You know, again, we would not only want the diversity in our workforce, but we want to be able to retain it. But if people don't feel included and comfortable in the work environment, they're not going to stay. So when we say why here, why now, my focus is going to be more on the inclusion part in our industry, just to add to the rest of my fellow panelists.
Thank you, Shauna. That's a really powerful statement there, the inclusivity part. Maybe you can just pick up on Yoshi. Yoshi, see if you got the better connection now. Yoshi, you have some opening comments you want to make? Oh, we've lost Yoshi. Okay, so you've all had really sort of powerful statements about good business. Oh, okay, we're still having problems with Yoshi's connection. So building better business, leaders, performance, those are sort of common statements. They echo across all of you as panelists. But I think, Shauna, you touched upon it, is sort of a focus now perhaps more on inclusivity. I mean, why do we struggle as an industry and in general in society? Why do we struggle with this inclusivity and diversity? Shauna, I'm going to turn that back to you to begin with.
I think for me personally, it has been not having a strong enough voice as to instances where I did not feel that sense of inclusivity. I didn't speak up. And I don't know if y'all can see what I'm wearing, but this is actually FRC meant for a women's body. And I wish that I had this when I first started in the field, and it's just not necessarily a sense of a fashion statement. For me, it was actually a safety issue too, and I didn't realize we're having to wear the men's FRC when I was doing my helicopter underwater evacuation training. Just because of the fit of those male coveralls, it actually hampered me trying to get out from that helicopter that was submerged in the tank. And, I really want to get the message out is to, you don't have to accept something that's already readily available. For example, in the case of the women's FRC, when we interview our female interns at the end of the summer and talk about what was the one challenge or the one thing you didn't like about working in the field, always the number one answer was the FRC that was available to them, because it's not necessarily cut for a woman's body. So that's one sense of inclusion, but also too, as far as inclusion as to restroom facilities, prayer rooms. There are so many aspects across the realm that I really think, well, some companies have done it very, very well. Other companies need to do a better job, but they won't realize that their employees aren't feeling inclusive if you actually don't have that voice to begin with.
Oh, thank you, Shauna. So yeah, having a voice and challenging the status quo. So David, talk to us a little bit about that sense of challenging the status quo. Where should we go around that?
I think when I've dealt with it, it's always been, not always, but it's often more innocent that people don't realize what they're doing. So I think it's human behavior. So challenging it's learning to have a language in a company to help people understand that they have a problem. I mean, for me, there's been plenty of conversations where I've had to ask, how's the glass ceiling going? And leaders don't like to hear that, but I've been in a position to have that conversation. And they're like, well, there's no barriers. I don't have barriers to anybody being on my team. And you go, well, this is how glass works. I mean, it looks like it's not there because you say there's no barrier, but all the indications say you prefer people who are like you, and people don't consciously do that. They just subconsciously are thinking, oh yeah, well, everyone's comfortable because I'm comfortable. Everyone comfortable? Yeah, we're all comfortable. So it really is helping people to develop an awareness of others and of difference, that people don't purposely move towards isolation of types or people or genders, but the truth is they are. If you leave them alone, they're going to lean into their type, and they're going to hire and feel comfortable with their type. So it's an education process that you have to give people experiences. And I'm not one for forcing everything, but I do want to force people who haven't had an experience of seeing their own issues and owning them and understanding them. So that's a journey of language. How do you create systems to give more opportunity, but also you can give opportunity and nothing changes, right? So you can have the right mix of people, but the individual still behaves in a way that isn't taking down the barriers, and it's really teaching people to be a lot more aware of what others are experiencing, and that's a conversation journey. It's not just the systems; it's learning that as a culture we have to engage people in understanding how someone else feels in a situation, because the self-awareness can be pretty low in human beings. So I think that's part of the challenge.
Okay, thanks, David. Yeah, you mentioned their self-awareness, and again, sort of finding that voice and being able to challenge cultures and thinking. Nihal, you're a young professional. What's your perspective on this in terms of finding a voice, challenging the status quo? How successful is that? How much additional pushing do you need to do as a woman in a workplace?
You definitely need additional push, that's for sure. And one more thing, adding up to Shauna's and David's comments, is having a mentor and selecting the right mentors. Because I read an article in HBR a couple of days ago that talks about the type of mentors. Some mentors would just advise you to attend meetings inside and out of, your department and stuff like that. So finding basically the right type of sponsorship and right type of mentorship is essential to getting ahead at your job. And it's essential for your voice to be heard with the C-suite people, and eventually getting a promotion that you both need and deserve.
Absolutely. You mentioned their mentorship, and we have actually had another SP Live that will be broadcasting later on mentoring and sponsoring. But Evelyn, echoing Nihal's comments there on mentorship, but also reflecting on, challenging the status quo and trying to find a voice. Again, you have a long experience in the industry. Where do we struggle? How do we challenge this? You are on mute.
Oh, yeah.
There we go.
I'm unmuted now. Yeah. So yeah, I really enjoyed what Shauna, David, and Nihal there has said. So I just want to restate a couple of comments that were made. So first of all, we are all wired to notice similar traits to ourselves. And, if we go down the path of having had personality type tests, we get a different, or we get a perspective into who we are. And as I think about the who am I, I'm at the end of the spectrum where I'm big picture, communication, be bold, be brief, be gone. I'm not the cool blue type that likes, where data is their friend. And so we need all these types. And because we are hardwired to notice the similar traits to ourselves, that's from where our bias essentially evolves, if you will. And so I think there's a lot that we can do ourselves to unlock our own potential and to realize the untapped value that that we can all relate to. And so David said it about self-awareness. The who am I? What are my triggers? How do I feel when someone disagrees with me? How do I feel when I am ignored, in a meeting? So there's something about understanding our triggers. There's something about looking at our circle beyond work and just asking ourselves, how diverse is my circle beyond work? So insights can come from that. We might notice that within our circle of comfort that, yeah, we all look the same, or we all talk the same language. And so, I'm suggesting here some of what we can do. We can seek feedback. It's one of the most powerful things we can do. And I recall talking at an event, it was PISA a few years ago, and I was pretty nervous. I stood up there, hundreds of people, and I think there were 99% of them men in dark suits. And I stood up there and I had that moment of, discomfort in my belly. And I stood before that crowd and I told them that this was not something I did a great deal of. And because I showed that vulnerability, I disarmed a lot of people in that audience. I think they suddenly related to me as a human being. And that eased my comfort level, but it also played back to me various body language that I was then able to see when I was making, the eye contact. And so my message here is that we all have a part to play in creating a more inclusive and more fair environment. And if we could all do our part to become more self-aware, work on self, seek feedback, and if we can, get access to a mentor and a coach as a safe container from which to, share our vulnerabilities, but also invite, frank and open feedback. I truly believe that can make and will make a huge difference. And so I'll leave it at that for now, Nils. But I'm hoping that there's some homework that we can all continually do in this area so that inclusive becomes the it becomes the capital letter I for inclusivity.
Thank you, Evelyn. We're going to try Yoshi again. Yoshi, can you hear us? You still have a connection problem. Whilst we're waiting for Yoshi, hopefully to connect with us, audience, I know you have viewpoints on this, so please tell us what you think and experience about diversity and inclusion. We want to see your comments and questions here on the show and bring them in and discuss them. Now, you've all talked about finding voice, the inclusion imperative, voice versus culture, corporate culture in particular, but also society culture versus corporate policies. There are obviously disconnects. Finding a voice, both as a young professional and as leaders, we need to understand that. And I think you've all mentioned self-awareness as being something very, very important. But how do we address that? I mean, we have all these corporate cultures, policies, etc., but how do we move that whole thing forward? How do we change things? David, you're in a position of leadership. You must see this struggle. I'll talk to Shauna and Evelyn afterwards, and then Nihal as a young professional. But David, again, why the struggle? What do we need to do?
Well, I know I didn't start at the top, so it was a journey to this. Although I will say I did come into particularly Varco when I started and saw really strong traits in diversity and inclusion that actually attracted me. I wasn't from oil and gas or an engineer. I came from architecture, but that was actually the thing. The way they led and how they were. Compared to others was really strong. And so I think top management is critical. I think knowing that you can speak up, because everyone has that, the company says that this is how we are. But until you test it, you don't know. And that makes everyone nervous to speak up. And that's probably where mentors help a lot is giving individuals the right ways to get things done and to bring things up. I know when I was younger in the business, my style was a lot more critical with people. I wanted to tell them how upset I was about anything that I saw, and it came across that I thought our leadership were idiots. And I actually got told that on the side very early. I was allowed to be with the leadership team, and the way I talked to them, they just said we're not bad people. But that's what happens is you get so caught into this language of complaining rather than solving. Learning to change your language on having ideas, coming with solutions is really important on making change happen for leadership. Having a policy, this has happened to me before, where someone explained when I came to Houston, I was in one of these groups and this is what happened. And I stood up for it and I said, no more. And I was very proud of that story. And the person who worked for me said, well, that's still there. And I was like, man. So, I mean, at least someone being willing to address me and say, you know what, it's not what you think. You thought it changed, but it changed maybe in your little space, but it did not change across that group. And I was able to go do something about it very quickly, actually, which was the good news of being in a healthy structure where it is true. I mean, I think it's really important that your what you say in public and what you see, sometimes those don't match, but what you know at the top is in the heart of the leadership. That has been my whole career, is trusting that I know I can stand up against this and I will not get let go. And I did that the whole way. I mean, I caused trouble, but for a good purpose, and I was always supported at the top. And so I think that's the importance of mentorship, as well as understanding where your leadership really is, their behavior. That's learning to talk about behavior at the top is something that I spend a lot of time with my other leaders on my team, and we talk and try and get people down a road of, can you see that this behavior that you're having does not match what we're saying? And I think that comes over time as you move further on, you have more responsibility to cause change, and you also have more voice. But in the early stages, I think learning how to address leadership and when the right timing is and having solutions, I think that's really my summary of how to deal with that.
That's really some really wise words there, David. Thank you. So learning to talk about behaviors, particularly leadership behaviors or at the leadership level, and changing your language and influencing upwards. Now, Shauna, in your experience, what's your opinion on what David just said? Is that realistic? Is that how we change?
Oh, no, David laid it out perfectly. And the thing is, a lot of leadership, well, let's tie into the mentoring too. So you could reach out and have a mentor, but if you yourself is not going to be a good mentee and accept that constructive criticism, then that relationship falls apart. And it's the same with your manager. You know, the managers should be getting feedback from their reports on how well of a manager they are. And in some cases, they may not realize that they're doing certain things. For example, and this was actually documented in a study that was done both in the US and the UK, and it was looking at unconscious bias of male managers with their female direct reports. And in this study, they actually concluded that the male managers whose wives were also in the workforce tended to support the women in the organization than the men whose wives were at stay at home. And that was a huge unconscious bias. And when I reflect back on all the managers that I've had in my career, I see it, it's night and day. But a lot of them may not necessarily realize that. But again, too, you know, at times when if you're concerned about or not necessarily going to your management or need some guidance on how to have that conversation, it's your HR department. Go to your HR reps. Those individuals in those departments are highly trained in diversity and inclusion issues, how to have these conversations, how to educate, you know, highly, if you're in a situation where you want to make an impact as far as D&I in your own organization, or even just in your small piece of it, utilize those resources in HR.
Okay, thank you, Shauna. So try and bring Yoshi in. There's a lot of background noise from Yoshi, but we've been trying to connect with you. Yoshi, as chair of the Committee for Women in Energy Now, Diversity Inclusion, you've been listening to what everybody else has been saying. What are your thoughts?
Well, we've been trying to transfer to diversity and inclusion for quite some time, actually. The intent for Women in Energy, for instance, was to improve the representation or to support that representation. But we realized that we weren't getting as many men involved with Women in Energy as we were with women. So earlier this year, we decided to change to diversity and inclusion, and we've gotten support from the board on that too. And what we've noticed is we're getting a lot more support from a larger group of people. One thing I do want to mention, and I want to echo a lot of other sentiments, that it's very imperative to have that cultural change. I was reading a Forbes article on what managers can do to inspire diversity and inclusion in their offices, and a lot of it is keeping it as a value rather than just a priority, because priorities do change. So those are some of my thoughts as far as improving the support for diversity and inclusion, and then how can managers, for instance, improve the diversity and inclusion as a value in their offices and as a part of the culture.
Okay, thank you, Yoshi. Nihal, let's switch to you as a young professional. So again, picking up what Yoshi just said there, about bringing men into the conversation, but also what David and Shauna was saying about being self-aware and changing language and influencing upwards. So I want to pick up an audience question here at the same time. So it was actually a really good question from Jessica Ramirez Angulo on LinkedIn. Nihal, have you experienced bias in the workplace as a woman, and how have you sort of overcome that? Again, reflecting on what's been said earlier by the others.
So yeah, a couple of points here. I do agree on what Shauna said. Like, if you have a wife that is in the workplace, you'll be more considerate. And in my case, if that person has a daughter, he will always be more thoughtful of where I'm heading. So to answer your question, of course I did. It's something that is inevitable, I'd say. But I try to overlook it because for me personally, I like to focus on my goals, like where I'm headed, what I want to do, and I like to utilize whatever I have in hand to get to my goals, so I don't let these biases stop me. And if they do, I kind of try to go around them somehow. I know it's easier said than done, but this is basically what I do personally. And also to add to what Yoshi said, I think we should have programs to match women, high potential women, with a certain program that, a fast track program or something like that, so we can actually promote more women, so they have a voice, so they are more seen than just competing with regular with men, and we just push them aside, and then we don't really look at them, and then we kind of say why more women are not promoted. Well, basically because you don't promote them. Yeah.
That's a very, very good argument and a very good observation there, Nihal. Evelyn, again, your position, your experience, what are your thoughts around this in terms of women not being seen, not being promoted, and again, influencing upward mentorship?
Yeah, so being there, it doesn't go away just because you've been in the industry a long time either. I've been in the industry probably as long, if not longer, than Dave Reid on this panel today. And I recall some pretty tough times where I would do one of two things. There were times where I would internalize the rejection, or there were times where I would find someone that I felt would listen to me, and it would often feel better once I had, got it off my chest, if you will. Confidence comes with time. And so, I found the courage to use my voice more often. And actually, when we use our voice, it can sometimes, like I said earlier, disarm the audience. And I know it takes courage to do that. And the culture may need some conditioning, but my advice would be use the voice, find the confidants, find the allies, and if there's access to a mentor or a coach, then seize these opportunities. Have these safe containers, these relationships where you're able to share, that you're able to reflect, because sometimes our own bias can be involved too. So let's not forget that, because we all have bias. It's not just them, whoever they are. And, I take us back to the EQ conversation we talked about earlier and our triggers. And so, I'm not sure what environment these days is right for the hypersensitive person. And so, how do we, develop more of our strengths? And how do we develop more respect for our own strengths? Because if we don't feel good about ourselves, then how does that manifest itself onto others? So hopefully there's some food for thought there, Nils.
Thank you, Evelyn. So again, it's coming back to that sort of what a lot of you have been saying, self-awareness and learning behaviors, how other people behave, your own behaviors and biases, and that allows you to be able to influence upwards as you understand who you are and who you work with and the organization you're working within. So it requires courage, as you just said, Evelyn. Now, I'm just going to turn the conversation slightly to a slightly different, well, it's a related topic, but, we've just come through this pandemic. There's been a lot of layoffs in the industry. Women, we know from other surveys, have been particularly impacted from the work from home culture, the demands of the home life, more women than men. Is this now an opportunity to address diversity and inclusion? Or is this going to be a problem that sets back the industry, oil and gas, but also industry in general? What is this now? This hollow middle, as it's called. Is it going to be a risk for us? Shauna, I can see your finger pointing up already, so let's go with you. Shauna?
I first want to address Nihal's point before getting to the hollow middle. Again, it's to be promoted, you need to be qualified for that role. And it's not necessarily an issue of diversity. And in our business, many upper management roles expect you to have that exposure within your company, including operations. If you miss that opportunity to work in operations or in a manufacturing plant, in a refinery, for example, you have to be realistic that doors down the way.
It's happening today. We just lost Shauna. I was muted. Apologies for that. So, David, let's just turn to you again. This hollow middle, I mean, you in your company, NOV, what's the look ahead for you guys? Do you have any new policies coming into place to try and address this problem?
Well, we're in the process of trying to understand it. I mean, this year has been very different. There's things we didn't have high on our awareness, of understanding what people are going through. It became, something we had to understand in this environment because people are at home, and so communication became harder. All of the normal cues were not there, and relationships were strained because they're all working through screens. So trying to understand where people were at. I mean, my team, I think we're about 60% women, most with children, and we're becoming teachers and doing their jobs. And so we had all sorts of new strains we'd never understood before. And so we're still wrestling with what's the right balance of understanding. Because I think understanding what people are going through is something we've had to adapt to and learn. And the idea of having having everyone learn to work with people better and to be more connected to where people are at is an unreasonable jump. And then having policy that try and supports people is also a challenge. So we're still wrestling with it. We're still trying to work out what's the right balance, because we do want to facilitate variance in our behaviors that support women with families, who when they're at home are struggling. And so it's been, we're still working with it. It's not cut and dry for us. It's really trying to work out what's the right thing to do. What we've gone to is mostly encouraging better behavior from managers, but I don't think that's the right long-term, although development of leadership and management is critical. We just have a lot of people dealing with new things. So it's I would call it a new science that we're trying to understand, trying to develop policy. So we're in the middle of those conversations. We did do some survey work that was better than expected of how people felt connected. And of course, we were adding more diversity and inclusion in that. We do a regular quarterly summary of all your employees, and you get feedback of how they're doing. And generally, as a company, we seem to be doing okay through COVID and people feeling connected. And so we're doing a lot of things, but most of it is not a standard behavior. Most of it is really how you've developed your management over time. And we have a lot of freedom in our environment, so we're very different to a lot of corporations where people are allowed to develop what they think is right for their business or their group. So we're talking about that. We don't have straight policies yet that we think can solve all the problems and the challenges that we're facing. So we're a lot more fluid as it stands today.
Oh, thank you for that, David. That's a very honest opinion there about the struggles that you're facing at the moment and trying to adapt and change policies. I'm just reflecting on a comment made by Sarah Fahmy on LinkedIn, you know, that a lot of the layoffs in the pandemic have hit women most of all in some ways. So, Nihal, again, from your perspective, a young professional, but also your involvement with the Women in Energy Committee in SPE, what do you think are the important next steps? How do we need to address this challenge of getting women back into the workplace and making sure we have that balance and diversity that we want to achieve?
Well, again, I'm going to reflect also on what Shauna was trying to say before she was cut off. We're not asking for a pass. We're just asking to be included. We're as qualified as men. This is something that needs to be highlighted. We're capable and we have skills that maybe somehow differs, but they are equally as important. So this is something that needs to be highlighted. Women are capable of doing great things, and this has to be seen through the upper management. Again, not asking for a pass, just asking for people just to look at us or not people, upper management to foster more women. That's what I have to say. Yeah.
Thank you, Nihal. So, you know, we've obviously been focusing a lot on women in the workplace. I mean, it's traditionally what diversity and inclusion is sort of labeled as, but it's obviously much bigger than that. It's a bigger spectrum of people that we're trying to include in the workplace and to achieve that balance. But also in terms of how a company performs, that's something that you all touched upon at the very beginning, is company performance, leadership performance. So Evelyn, talk to us a little bit about company performance and sort of social governance and environmental governance and how we as industry and corporations behave.
Okay, thanks, Nils. So yeah, lots of research out there already confirms that companies that have a more inclusive and more diverse workforce tend to perform better. So I think the case for an inclusive, equitable and diverse workforce is there. And I don't think there's much argument, you know, about that case. I think what's interesting, and I said it earlier today, you know, with the society, you know, the expectations that society have of businesses today, changing very fast. And so I'm sure everybody participating today has familiarity with ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And recently I participated in a feedback session with Corn Ferry, actually. And what I was curious about was, where is ESG these days on the performance management spectrum of the C-suite? And what I learned was that increasingly industrial companies have now got ESG alongside their safety metrics. And as our industry well knows, that safety, you know, has been our #1 priority, rightly so, should continue. And so there's an emergence here where ESG is becoming of comparable importance and significance. And so if not evident today, I believe it is coming, that ESG will feature significantly as a component of executive compensation. The other thing that I learned from that dialogue is that D&I is synonymous with ESG as a metric within these progressive organizations. So this gives me some encouragement. It gives me hope that before long, that we can expect heightened focus on our metrics for D&I, which plug into ESG, which then plug into the overall total compensation parameters. And I think from there, it's going to lend itself to a shift in the focus in how inclusion is monitored. It's very easy to come up with the tangibility of how many people do we have from the whole range of classifications, but not so easy to determine how effective is the inclusion element. And so, there are lots of ways to start trending on inclusion. It starts really with listening and talking and doing surveys, but also to put more emphasis on the how of work and not so much the what of work. And if we could become increasingly conditioned to thinking about the how and rewarding behaviors associated with the how, I think that will unlock a lot more creativity. I think the creativity will then lead to enhanced performance. The enhanced performance then has a great chance of improving our industry's reputation and our image. And then we become attractive again to the STEM community and other communities. So I believe ESG is an imperative, and what gets measured gets done. So
thank you, Evelyn. Yeah, that's certainly important messaging there in terms of how we improve our behaviors again, but also measuring our performance. And it comes back to a comment made earlier by Ingrid Tortoso on YouTube. Diversity is relatively easy to measure, but how do organizations measure inclusivity? It comes back to metrics. So certainly that's part of it, but we're very good at measuring performance, but often, as we've talked about today, is we struggle to actually make this really happen. And again, picking up another audience question from Nidal Abdul Kadar on LinkedIn, will the work from home culture cut short the infrastructure expense? But I guess really, how does it change the work-life balance and the work-life culture and impacting diversity and inclusion? So really, I want to sort of round off today's discussion asking you all, what's going to separate the best from the rest? Based on what we've discussed today, how do we separate ourselves? Evelyn, you talked about ESG becoming an important component, as important as diversity and inclusion, and measuring that. But, how are we going to change and separate the best from the rest? David, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, thanks. We spent many years doing the hard work as opposed to, I think we talked about this already. You can elevate people into roles. And I think one of the big answers is having the diversity at the top and over the right, applications so that we're creating mix. But we took a longer road of pushing the right people through the right experiences. So we're just starting to see. So on our leadership team, there were 3 women, but now there are 2. But it's been really helpful for me to have conversation and bring conversation where perspectives are at the table and able to help people to understand who previously thought they were fully understanding the issues. And so I think diversity at the top is going to be critical because it has to be true and real. And when they're there, that their voice is heard. So that I'm sure there are people who are going to have diverse leadership, but are they able to influence the larger group? And so I think that's going to be the secret to being great at this. Because I think when I've had a very diverse team for a number of years now, and a lot of people have said, well, you're just trying to get diversity into your team. And I'm not particularly. I'm just trying to get talent. It just so happens talent feels safe when they are diverse in my teams. And I think that's really important, that when people get into roles where they're adding variance into the types of human beings doing the job, I think that it really, if they have a voice, a place, they're welcome and they're able to influence, it changes everything. I think and when people see other people like them in other roles that are significant, they just understand that it's not only possible, it's welcome. And I think when you do that, that is the game for everybody, because you want the best of the best in all of your roles. And if you miss out sections of society because of your own issues, that's not going to work. So it's really about making it real at the top, I think.
Yeah, thanks, David. That's very, very inspirational messaging there. I really like what you said. Yoshi, let's go with you again, hopefully. You as a young professional, what separates the best from the rest?
That's a very good question. I would hop off on what David was talking about regarding diversity at the top. That if we have diversity at the top, you're leading by example, and you'd be able to improve your influence on a larger group of people. There's a saying that goes that diversity is an invitation to the party, but inclusion is getting invited to dance. So I would say having more engagement programs for especially for people that are finally coming back into the workforce, especially for women that have been on maternity leave. I know there's some larger organizations that have a welcome back program where they would try to integrate people that have been outside of the workforce for quite some time to come back to integrate into the workforce. From a young professional's perspective, I would say we have more engagement programs that involve that focus on the diversity and inclusion and have some, and I wouldn't just say training, but application of the training of cultural sensitivity and application of the training of listening to different types of feedback or different types of inputs, having that awareness, especially coming from the top, and then implementing from those engagement programs would separate the best from the rest.
That was, very good messaging there. So thank you very much, Yoshi. Certainly those programs are needed to bring people back into the workplace, and certainly to target women and others to bring them back into the workplace. Nihal, again, as a young professional, what separates the best from the rest? What are your expectations? What are the changes to come?
Yeah, so again, I agree with the part that diversity and inclusion should be on the top of the list. One thing else, which relates more to inclusion really than diversity, is making sure that everyone is heard and everyone is appreciated, because sometimes the change comes from the fresh grad you have or the youngest person at the company. They might have great ideas that if this can give you get you ahead in your in the game of the business and stuff like that. So yeah, inclusion, just making sure everyone is heard, creating a great environment for everyone to be productive and creative and just have their their best interest in mind, because if you did that, they will have your best interest in mind. Yeah.
Thank you, Nihal. Yeah. Evelyn, you talked a lot earlier about self-awareness and having the courage to find a voice. Thoughts around separating the best from the rest around that piece?
Sure. So David said it earlier, tone from the top is really important. I think as well, a lot of companies have people as a value, but is that real or is that window dressing? So there's something about authentic leadership. And I think the companies that exhibit authenticity around their people are likely to reach the best quicker than the rest. I think another measure is to listen to the experiences of the workforce itself. If the worker experience is that they're happy, that they feel included, that they feel that their development goals are being met, they feel there's equity, then you're going to get more from that individual. You're going to get loyalty. Loyalty will inform opportunity, which will inform results, and so on. The one thing that troubles me through yet another downsizing in the industry, and I've experienced this firsthand, you've got to take time to talk to your people. And with all the downsizing, a lot of the work isn't changing. So the work that's left behind has shifted onto other people. Now there's a priorities challenge. And so if the people that are working today have fuller plates than they once had, how do they create the space and the time, A, for their own reflection, and B, to talk and listen to their organizations? And I'm not hearing enough discussion on this topic. I recognize the downsizing, in many cases is a survival tactic. But I also question, is there enough emphasis going on reinventing our ways of working that would then free up the time for connecting with our workforce? And so, again, the self-awareness message, I just can't emphasize it enough, because we need to know our why. We need to know our why we're not open to changing processes. We need to open our why. It's difficult for us to hear a challenge from somewhere, and so on. And I think the more human and authentic leadership we can have top down will be a critical feature of the best being the best. Nils.
Yeah, thank you, Evelyn. That's, again, very powerful messaging there. So authenticity in leadership. I also want to echo that with authenticity as a worker and finding your voice, because if your voice is not heard, if you're not authentic as an individual contributor, then you will not be able to really change an organization. And that's something we've been talking about all along here, is influencing upwards, and that requires your own authenticity, as well as authenticity from the leadership to change and to want to listen. Some really great challenges. This is a conversation that we're going to have to continue. Certainly we'll be continuing it in January when we return to the subject of diversity and inclusion. In the meantime, Evelyn, Nihal, Yoshi, David, and Shauna, who lost their connection due to a storm, thank you very much for participating today, sharing your thoughts and your insights. Some really powerful messages to our audience. And audience, thank you for all your contributions and comments. Really appreciate those. So again, to everybody, thank you very much for joining us today. And a special thank you to SBE Foundation for sponsoring SBE Live. So everybody, have a great day and thank you.
Thanks. See ya.
Bye.